Hi, I'm Michelle, and today at my quilting beehive, I'm going to show you how to make a Dresden flower or Dresden plate using 12 Dresden pieces. We're going to start by cutting. You're going to need to trace your template, and you can trace it on template plastic if you'd like. If you're making a lot of Dresden flowers, I would recommend the template plastic because it'll hold up better. But if you're only going to make one or two, you can trace it on freezer paper. And so I'm going to show you the two ways to cut based on these. We'll start with the freezer paper. Freezer paper is great because the back is waxy and you can press it and iron it and it will stick to your fabric. And we'll show you how that works right here. I have on my ironing board strips of fabric that are 3 inches wide because I'm going to use 3-inch size petals for my flower today. I'm going to put the freezer paper down the waxy side touching the fabric, and I'm going to use a hot dry iron, and I'm just going to hold it there for a second, and then that freezer paper will stick to my fabric. I have my fabric folded and I have 2 layers, so I have actually 4 plies of fabric there, so one cut will give me 4 Dresden wedges. Now that my paper is fused there, it won't slip around, I don't have to worry about it moving. I'm going to place a ruler along the paper, and I'm very careful because I don't want to cut the paper, so I'm making sure the ruler is just to the edge of the paper without cutting the paper, and I can cut my piece, slide the good piece away, and this one, because it's the first one on the row, I'm going to turn it around and I can cut the second side. Very careful, line up your ruler so you don't cut the paper and you're cutting the angle you need for your Dresden. And cut that away. And there you go. And the paper will peel right off because it was just the wax that kind of gave it a little stick. Peels right off and you can't even tell it was there. And you can reuse this piece. If you need to cut more, you can bring this back over to your iron and you can put it back on there, heat it up, and it will stick ready for you to cut your next set. So I cut 4, I need a total of 12. So I am going to bring it back over and cut the next stack, which will give me 4 more. And I'm going to line it up carefully and cut through all 4 layers. Careful not to cut the paper. Now, if you were using template plastic instead of this, it would be the same way. You can just keep repeating across the row. We could put this one back on here, or you can use the template plastic. And if you're using template plastic, that acts like the ruler, and you can use your rotary cutter along the side of it and just hold it in place, careful so it doesn't slip like that. And you can keep cutting pieces, rotating your pattern back and forth across the strip for as many as you need. But I have 4, 8, 12 pieces right here, so that is enough cutting for one block. Once you have all your pieces cut, you're going to prepare the Dresden points. To make the points on your Dresden, you're going to be folding your Dresden pieces in half, right sides together, along the top edge, the long edge, the bottom is here, the wider edge is at the top. Fold that right in half, and you're going to sew using a 1/4-inch seam. You want a straight stitch center, 1/4-inch seam, set it up so you have your 1/4-inch. And I'm going to make my stitch just a little tighter than I normally would, so I don't have to worry about it coming undone when we turn them inside right. All right, 1/4-inch, straight stitch, tighter stitch, and you're just going to sew that little bit right through there. And I'm going to recommend chain piecing for this because obviously each flower will have 10 petals, so 12 petals, I'm sorry, 12 petals, so you want to make sure chain piecing makes it fast and easy. You're just sewing just a little stitch across each line. I'm using grunge fabric here. This is bright yellow grunge, which is cheerful and happy. Dresden blocks are versatile. You can, this one happens to be all yellow, but you could make them with all different colored petals. You can make them in any different styles. I've even made one out of neckties, which is a fun way to do it. You can make a memory quilt from neckties, cut the pieces up over the necktie and make little Dresdens with them. And continue to chain piece until you have all of these stitched across the top. Once you have all your pieces chained together, you're going to bring them back to your ironing board and you're going to clip them apart. Just a quick snip to get the thread in between them. So you have all your pieces. After they're all snipped apart, on the folded side, we're going to snip a little corner at each one to remove the extra bulk. So when we turn them inside out, it'll be nice and pointy and not have an extra lump in there. So each one on the folded side, careful not to cut your stitches. You're just going to cut away a little triangle from each one. Once you have that all snipped away, you're going to press them. And you want to press that seam open because there's going to be bulk in there. If you press it to one side, it'll be a little bulky. I'm going to start by using my finger, and then I'll use the iron to just press that open. Okay? And for each one, after you press it open, then you'll turn it inside right. And I've got a tool for poking here. I'm going to poke my point so it's nice and sharp. And then we'll give it a press from this side to flatten it out. Turn my steam on, get it a little hotter over there. There we go. So you'll repeat that for each one. So again, you clip the corner, you open the seam so it's pressed open. Touch that with the iron just to get it flat, and then turn it inside right. And use your tool to poke that corner nice and pointy. And then give it a press. And you'll repeat that until you have all 12 pieces. Once you have all your petals pressed and pointy at the top, you can lay them out into your flower shape, your Dresden. And without the seam sewn, it's quite large. They'll get much smaller once you take in all that seam allowance. There you go. So now I'm just going to grab two at a time and I'm going to sew them together. You're going to take two, put them right sides together. And when you sew these, I would start at the folded edge because you want to make sure those really line up there. If they don't line up at the bottom, you're going to be putting a circle over them at the end. So if something's off, you'd rather it be off at the bottom than the top. But match them up and start your sewing at the top by the folded edge. And you can sew right down to the end. Then you'll take your next two and continue lining them up nice and putting them through and sewing. Now Dresden plates can come in different sizes with different numbers of petals. These are 12 petal Dresden, so they're a little wider. There are skinnier ones. They're all different shaped templates you can get from different rulers you can buy that will cut different sizes for you. But we're using the 12 petal option. And there you go. So continue doing that until you have them all sewn in groups of two. Once your groups of two are all together, you can snip them apart if you chain pieced. And get them ready for pressing. I'm going to press all the seams open on this one. It'll help them lay flatter, so you do want to press them open. It will reduce bulk in the center and make it nice. Press it from the back and then make sure you didn't get any puckers in there. Go back to the front and press it from the front. And that will make sure it's nice and smooth and flat and there's no little folds on the front side. So open it up with your fingers. Press it so the seams are open. And then flip it over, make sure there's no folds in your fabric and press it from that side. Press all of your petals and then you'll get ready to sew some more. Once you have them all pressed and nice and flat, you're going to continue to join them together, and we'll make them actually in sets of three. So we'll sew these three together and these three together to get our two halves of our flower together. Again, starting from the folded side. Now when you're sewing all of these pieces, you want to make sure you have an accurate 1/4 inch seam. If you have a really large seam, when you get to the end, it's going to not lay flat. You won't have a nice flower at the end. And if you have too small of a seam, there'll be too much in there as well. So you need to try to have an accurate 1/4 inch seam. If you need tips on an accurate 1/4 inch seam, I do have a video on piecing 4 patches that includes tips on getting an accurate 1/4 inch seam. So look up that video. I'll put a link to it in the description below for you as well. I am going to separate these apart and I'll add the next petal right to it. So it's a group of 3 of them together this time. And you'll just keep going until they're all sewn. And just like when we had the groups of 2, you'll bring them back to the ironing board and press all the seams open. There are some biased edges on there, so you want to avoid stretching it too much. So first I opened them from the back, then I will flip it over and make sure they're all nice and flat and there's no folds in my fabric. And put them in. Use your fingers to open it up. Give it a nice press. And then flip it over and check to make sure there's no puckers on the front. Now that we have our 2 pieces, we're going to join them together to make one. We'll start on this side and sew that seam. And then we'll flip it over and do the final seam here. After you have your flower all pieced and together and pressed flat, you're going to make the centerpiece for the flower. You'll trace your circle, and this is a 3.5 inch circle for our 3 inch petals. And I'm going to cut a piece of center fabric, which is going to be brown on mine. And this is Pellin SF101. It's a fusible stabilizer. It's very lightweight. And I'm tracing my circle on the non-fusible side. This is the fusible side. This is the right side. And I'm going to trace it like that. And I'm going to put it right sides together with my fabric that I want for the center. Then you'll take a pair of scissors and you'll cut your circle through both layers. You can pin them together if it helps you. And just cut on your line all the way around your circle. And the reason we're doing that is because by using this, we'll be able to sew around the circle and flip it and fold it so it has finished edges instead of raw edges. You can use a fusible web and just cut and fuse your piece on, but it won't have the finished edges that we're going to get by doing it this way. So cut a circle through both your fabric that you want and your stabilizer that's fusible. Put the fusible side, right side to the fabric, and then you'll bring it to your machine and sew. Okay, I have my fabric and my interfacing right sides together, fusible side down, and I brought it to my machine. I'm going to sew around it with a 1/4 inch seam. And just go slow so you can turn the circle as you go all the way around. And notice I'm just turning the fabric, keeping it lined up with the edge of my foot so I can go all the way around in a circle. I sewed the complete circle. I did not leave an opening anywhere. I sewed all the way around the circle. Now you want to carefully pull these two plies apart, and you're going to use your scissors to put a little snip in just the fusible side. Careful not to snip your fabric. And I'm going to put an opening near the center, about an inch, like that, so we can turn it inside right. Before I turn it inside right, though, I want to snip my curve so all the fabric that's in there doesn't get tangled up and doesn't make lumps. So you're just going to put little snips about every 1/4 inch all the way around your circle, like this. Trimming your curve helps it fold inside right and be flat. Don't skip this step or you'll have a lumpy circle. Snip, snip. Careful not to snip your thread. That's very important. You don't want to cut your stitches or you'll have a hole in your circle. You want to get close to your stitches but not cut them. And just a couple more. There you go. Now when I turn it inside right, I can pull the brown fabric through. And you'll want a tool of some kind that you can smooth your edges with. And I'm just pushing the fabric around the edge so that seam gets pushed all the way out, and you'll have a circle. Now it's important, this is fusible now. The fusible is now on the outside because we turned it. Don't press this until you are ready to put it where it needs to be. Make sure you get those edges nice and worked out. Take the time, it's worth the effort. You'll be happy you did it later. All the way around. Like that. Now that you have your pieces ready to go, we can put our Dresden flower on the background fabric. I'm using a 9.5 by 12.5 inch rectangle, and I'm putting mine, I want it about an inch from the bottom, and I can use a ruler to line that up. Make sure it's it's about an inch from each side, and I've got extra at the top. For the pattern I'm using this in, I'm going to need the extra fabric up there. You can put it in a 9-inch square if you wanted to just make a block with just the Dresden in the middle. So I'm lining that up where I want it, and then I will take a few pins just to hold it in place. I like to pin probably every other petal. I'm putting my pins, I'm going to be sewing around the edges here, and I don't want my pins in the way, so I'm putting my pins so they won't be in the way, and I can just leave them in while I'm sewing. And I'll put one more up here. You want to make sure it's secure so it doesn't shift around when you're ready to sew it in place. Flat. Okay. Now with our fusible on the back of our centerpiece, we can put that where we want it, and we can actually stick it right in place, and it will attach permanent and hold there. You know, I'll line it up by eye, make sure it's covering all the petal pieces like that. And I'm just going to take my hot iron and steam it. Hold it for a few seconds. There we go. And that will be fused to your fabric. To sew around my flower center, I am going to use a blanket stitch. So I'm switching my sewing machine foot out to a foot that allows me to do a blanket stitch with an open part. And I'm going to set my machine for a blanket stitch. And I don't want it to be too tight, so I'm going to make it a little longer, add to the length of it, and I'm going with a size 3 width and a size 4 length, but play around with your machine and see what size you like. Now what's important about a blanket stitch is to know, especially going around this curved circle, you want to make sure that you understand the stitch. It goes forward, back, forward, and then left, right. Forward, back, forward, left, right. So listen to your machine, go slow at first, and never turn it when it's going forward, back, because you want it to complete that stitch. If you turn it in the middle of that, that stitch won't be on top of itself where it's supposed to be. So I'm watching my needle, My needle's going to be right at the edge of my brown circle. That's where I want it to go. I'm going to start with a lock stitch. It just stitches in place right there. And then if you watch my machine carefully, it's going to go forward then back, forward, and then it's going to go in and back out. So you want to watch that step. If you need to adjust the movement of it, wait until it's not going over itself. So if it goes forward, back, forward, you can turn it after that. Don't turn it in the middle of that, or you'll have your stitches show and they'll be crooked. So I'll go real slow. Forward, back, forward, in and out. Watch your machine. Some machines have different stitches. This is the blanket stitch my machine does, and I just listen to the rhythm. Forward, back, forward, in and out. And then you can turn a little bit and reposition at the end of that stitch. And this is a gentle curve. It's not super tight, so we don't have to have a lot of movement. But if you find it's getting off the circle, you can adjust it. It went forward already, so I'm going to finish the back forward and then give it just a little adjustment. And then in and out. Forward, back, forward. And it takes its time. And after it does that in and out is when you can give it a little turn so it goes around the curve. And then I turned it when it was done with that stitch, forward, back, forward. And I know I go slow so I can stop it, take my foot off the pedal when I need to adjust, and try to do the adjustments at the end of a stitch. And that was forward, back, forward. I turned it just a hair to do the in and out now, because I felt like it wasn't quite lined up perfectly. Take your time, listen to the machine, listen to the stitches, and work your way all the way around your flower. Once you have your blanket stitch all done, you can change back to the thread color you want to use around the outside of your flower. If you don't have a blanket stitch, you could try a zigzag stitch, or you could do a straight stitch around that, and that would work as well. You could also do hand stitching if you wanted to be creative and do handwork if you like handwork. To sew around the edge of the flower, I'm going to use a straight stitch. And in my straight stitch, I want it to be very close to the edge, so I'm going to sew. My 1/4 inch foot has an 1/8 inch mark on this side, so if I'm going to sew about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of the flower. And I'm going to use a straight stitch, so I'm going to make sure my machine straight stitch center, so it goes right down the middle of my foot. And I'm going to use a standard length 2.5 inch on my machine. And I'm just going to follow the edge of the flower with my 1/8 inch edge is what I'm looking at. And watch carefully. When I get to the point, I can pivot and go around, move those out of the way. And I'm sewing, I'm watching the left side of my foot, so my flower's on the right side, so I can do that. And then you will just follow all the way around your flower. Each time you get to the corner, you pivot. Make sure the foot goes up. You have to lift your foot up to pivot. And then go around the next side. And when you get to that seam line between the two petals, that's when it's time to turn. And try to stay close to the edge. And then pivot. I need to go one more stitch, I think. I wasn't quite to the edge yet. And there you go. And pivot. Continue around the flower. Once you finish sewing around your flower, you can remove all of the pins and your block will be complete. Now that you know how to make one block, you can make them in different sizes and different colors and make as many blocks as you'd like. If you'd like to get a pattern with an instruction sheet and the templates that you need, you can go to my Etsy store and there'll be a link below in the description. Thank you for joining me in making this block today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.